Hi, everyone. This is Jake, and I'm here with Sarah Zoellick. She's the crime and courts reporter for the Wyoming Tribune-Eagle, and she's been nice enough to record this podcast with me today so that we can talk about a few of the issues that you guys will probably experience when you go out to do your first live public affairs crime reporting assignment here. And then we also want to talk a little bit about the first discussion question that we currently have up, which is about the ethics of publishing crime and the names of people attached to various crimes. So, Sarah, thank you so much for agreeing to do the interview today.
Sure.
All right, so let's start off with, I think our first question was to talk about where do you find stories? Tell me a little bit about your day-to-day and how you find stories.
I get most of my stories from sitting in court. I'm in court usually 3 times a day. There's 3 district judges here, and I'll sit through their criminal court, and that's when I pick up on cases, catch people getting sentenced or pleading guilty to things, find out when trials are going to be held. Some cases I have to find out from checking paperwork because, sex offenses, we don't get those crimes in the booking sheets, and so those don't go in the police blotter, so I don't know about them until they get transferred to district court. So that's how I find out about those. Bigger crimes and stuff, of course, we depend on the police department or the sheriff's department to send a press release saying there was a homicide or there's a murder investigation or things like that. There was one incident we talk about it every once in a while, me and the PIO for the police department. Not this past summer, but last summer, they arrested a guy for allegedly killing a baby or manslaughter for contributing to the death of a baby. And they arrested him and didn't tell the PIO, and so the PIO was getting calls about it, and his response was, well, surely they would have told me if they did something like that. Well, he was wrong, and they didn't. So sometimes the lines of communication break down, but we just hope that with some of the big stuff, we find out about that. Of course, sometimes we hear stuff on the scanner,
right,
like the coin shop incident, things that break during the day when people are in the newsroom. We certainly hear about those on the scanner. The affordable living senior center shooting, we heard about that on the scanner.
Right.
So it just kind of depends, but a lot of it is sitting in court.
Okay. And just as a quick clarification, since a lot of the students in here might not necessarily know what the scanner is, that is the police radio that you have in the newsroom. And so a scanner, basically you can, police radios are a public record, or it uses public airwaves. And so thus you have access to it. You can actually, there's some police departments that actually have like an online feed of their, police channel. And then I think a lot of departments have I believe a secondary channel where they can have more private conversations.
Right, yeah, what's going on in their squad cars and things like that.
Right.
Obviously we're not hearing, but we're hearing the 911 dispatch, that kind of, not the conversation with the dispatcher, but when they're asking officers to go out to a scene, oh, we got a report of a shooting at this address, and then that's, so when they're dispatching them that way.
Right, okay. Let's talk a little bit about the blotter. One of the reporting assignment for this unit is to go to your local sheriff's department or city police department, or, for the Laramie kids, they can go to the University of Wyoming Police Department and ask to see an arrest record, which you often refer to as a booking sheet. And those are a matter of public record, correct?
Yes. Here in the newsroom, we get those faxed to us, the jail booking sheets, and it's usually the first sheet will have the name, the age, the address, the location of the arrest, the charges or the allegations, and then it has some other information on it too. And then the second sheet might have a little summary of what happened. So we get those faxed to us from the jail here because they're the booking sheets from when they're booked into the jail. So the only people that appear in the blotter are people who've been arrested, handcuffed, and taken to the jail. Those documents become part of a police case file, so you could request them from the police department, I think. the thing with covering this beat is every jurisdiction is different and everyone works in a little bit of a different way. Here, if you want to see the booking sheets, you can go to the sheriff's department and ask to see them. I know one of our reporters, as a student, she had to do that, and I think they give you a little bit harder of a time if you're a member of the public than the media. They might look over your shoulder a little bit and wonder what you're doing, but it's definitely public record, and you can go look at those. And it might only be that first sheet. I don't know what they let you look at, but you can definitely ask.
Okay. And that's an important thing to know too, is that, even though it's a public record, some folks within a particular police department might not necessarily automatically realize that, and so sometimes you have to be, polite but assertive about your rights to public records as a member of the public, because one point I always try to make with my journalism students is that there's no special journalism license. We don't have any more access as journalists than the average Joe on the street.
Right.
Everybody has the same access to public records.
Right. And that's why we fight so hard when we do get pushback from authorities, because we're not just fighting on behalf of ourselves, we're fighting on behalf of the public. So when we can't get access to something, that means John Doe on the street can't get access to something, and that is problematic, especially because we see public records as being the public's records. You own them, not the police department. Your tax dollars fund the police department. Those are your records.
Right, exactly. Well said, well said. So, if I'm a brand new reporter and I show up at the Laramie Police Department or the Casper Police Department or the Denver Police Department, and I'm looking to get my hands on arrest records, and what I think I put in the assignment, I have it right in front of me, but if memory serves, I said, to ask for arrest records from like the last 48 to 72 hours, depending on where you're at. If you're at the Denver Police Department, you're going to have a lot more within.
Yeah.
You might even only have to ask for like the last 12 or so in some place like Denver. If you're in, say, I don't know, Ethany, Wyoming, you might ask for the last week, because you're probably going to have,
Right.
population difference there. So I walk into a police station, I ask for arrest records. Who should I ask?
I would start with just who the first person you come in contact with. If there's, the person at the front desk, just tell them what you're there for, what you need, what you're looking for. Again, like you mentioned, be assertive. It helps to kind of have a sense of confidence. Some police departments might have like a public access computer in the lobby where you could look that stuff up, and you don't have to have them bring you something printed. At my previous job, there was a binder, a big 3-ring binder where they would put all of the printed pages from the arrest, and you would just go and look at that and see if there were any interesting arrests. So everywhere does it a little bit differently. But just start with whoever you first come in contact with, and just be polite and ask, who do I need to talk to, or who do I need to see about getting this information? Okay.
You had mentioned previously that, for instance, sex crimes are not usually in the blotter. You don't find out about those until they hit court. Can you explain to the students why that is?
I mean, I actually haven't asked. I kind of just assumed it has a lot to do with how sensitive those cases are, not wanting to broadcast those to the public. A lot of those cases go to trial. Not all of them end in convictions. They're definitely not clear-cut cases, especially when they involve children. So I think it just has a lot to do with keeping those cases private for as long as possible in the court system. Is essentially, once they hit district court, which is when I find out about them, is after they've either had a preliminary hearing in circuit court or waived that preliminary hearing in circuit court. And the preliminary hearing is designed for a judge to hear the evidence, some evidence in the case. Obviously, they don't put on an entire trial, but they'll usually bring in a witness. It's most likely the detective, to talk about the evidence, and the judge decides if there's probable cause to send the case on to district court. So theoretically, a case could end there if the judge decides there's really nothing here to suggest that this person might have done this. And then, of course, once you go to trial, there's a much higher burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So it's a lesser proof to move it on in the process. But at that point, it's been through a couple checks, so to speak. And it certainly doesn't mean that the person is guilty, but it protects the people accused of those crimes for a little bit longer, I think, and doesn't put them in the public eye immediately.
Right, until there's even more evidence that they
Right.
And I think there's a little bit of it with trying to protect the victims as well. Then so if you have identifying characteristics, especially in a small town, depending on, and the smaller the town, the more everybody knows everybody else's business.
Definitely.
The more of those little characteristics you have, the more you can start to figure out who the victims are. So, think of it like this. If you had, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and Mr. Smith is arrested on charges of, domestic violence, you're probably going to make an assumption, and in a lot of cases, you're probably going to be right that Mrs. Smith was the victim. And you want to try to protect that as much as possible. So,
Right.
All right. Let's change gears a little bit here. So we had when we were having our preliminary interview for this, we had talked about the what the blotter is, and one of the things that I gave them was a copy of the blotter that is published by the Tribune-Eagle and a copy of the blotter that's published by the Casper Star-Tribune, because the two biggest papers probably do the best jobs on the blotters there, and they were the two that I could find online. That kind of helped too. So the blotter, though, you like to say is the end product, right?
Right. We get the booking sheets, as I mentioned before, and that's kind of the raw information. And then I just take that information and type it up into the form that goes in the paper, and then that's what is the police blotter. So what appears in the paper isn't how we get it, but it's the exact information that we receive. So I get a lot of people calling and saying, can I keep my name out of the blotter? Can I change this information? The answer is always no, because we don't give anybody an exception. One of our reporters had to type up her sister in the blotter. It's just that if our editor got arrested tonight, he would be in the police blotter. There's absolutely no exceptions. And then that information, because it's coming from the sheriff's department, if people call us and say, oh, so-and-so used my address, they don't live with me, it was wrong, I have to tell them, I'm really sorry about your situation, but there's nothing I can do about it unless you can get the sheriff's department or the police department to correct that information. And people can see it as problematic because you're just running arrests. It's not... You don't even know if those charges are going to be filed, because that's up to the district attorney's office. The blotter is just people who police or sheriff's deputies believe have committed a crime. But we do run that little blurb at the end saying that all people are innocent until proven guilty, and if your charges are dismissed, people are more than welcome to come in or mail in or send in, however they want, the court documents that prove or that show that the charge was dismissed. And then we'll publish on the top of the blotter an editor's note saying so-and-so was arrested, but the charge was dismissed. So hopefully that clears their name a little bit, because, the information's out there. We put our blotters online now, which was kind of a new development. They're behind the hard paywall, so you have to have a subscription to see them no matter what. They're not part of the free 10 articles we're doing right now. But they are out there. And people can get really upset when they see their name in the paper or want to try to avoid putting their name in the paper. But our response, at least among us as reporters, is always, if you don't want your name in the blotter, don't do something to get your name in the blotter.
That's very true. When I was 16, I was attending Laramie High School. I'm a Laramie native. When I was 16, I drove like a lot of 16-year-olds boys do, which is very fast and recklessly, and I got a speeding ticket. and I was afraid to fess up to my parents about it, and thought, well, if I just pay it and nobody is paying attention, hopefully they won't notice the insurance has gone up or something. I don't know why I thought I'd get away with it. My mom found out by seeing my name in the Laramie Boomerang as, being fined for a traffic ticket. Now, the Boomerang, I don't know if they still do. I think they still do. I see the hard copy on occasion when I'm in Laramie to see my parents, and I think they still do a lot of different, they'll do speeding tickets and all sorts of police calls, so that if the fire department comes out to, get Mrs. Jones's cat out of a tree, they'll actually have that in there as well. Bigger papers don't do that as much because they don't want to, dedicate their resources to that as much.
Right. It's a lot of, in some ways the blotter is still kind of a small town thing. I mean, you're not going to look at the Chicago Tribune and see a police blotter. It would take up the entire paper and probably then some.
Right.
And then news spreads fast in a small town, so you can kind of look at it as a little bit problematic, but at the same time it's a public service. It's nice to know, when there's crime happening on your street or in your neighborhood, or your neighbor's allegedly beating his wife, or your coworker is getting 3 DUIs in a month. Just having that public knowledge is really important to have that out there.
Yeah. So, ethically, one of our ethics questions that we're having a discussion on currently online is about the fact that when that blotter is published, it lives forever. It used to be that it would show up in the paper and then it would go away the next day because the paper was only a daily occurrence, and if you were going to find that record, you'd have to go into you'd have to go to the library and find a hard copy that had been archived in a public library or at the newspaper's library, or you might be able, if you're going to get it electronically, you might be able to get through a service like LexisNexis. Nowadays, now that we have access to so much information online, that stuff can and will live forever a lot of times. So how does the Tribune-Eagle deal with that? If I'm arrested and then it turns out that I was falsely arrested, or I'm not convicted of my crime or exonerated or whatever happens, how do I clear my name online then?
Well, I would hope that if the charge was dismissed, people would come to us and say the charge was dismissed. And I actually I wrote a huge story about a gentleman who was convicted at trial, appealed, and then I'm trying to remember the process of he appealed the conviction, and then it went back to the district court, and they just decided to not pursue the case anymore because of the way the Supreme Court wrote their decision, I think is how it was. They essentially dismissed the charges. So he no longer had those convictions, and I did a huge long story about it. And something I tell people in the community a lot is, we can only do so much. If you know about something, let us know. If you had a story written about you in our paper and then the charges were dismissed, let us know. It doesn't hurt to clear the record. So in some ways, it's nice when people let us know. Some of it's just covering the courts and knowing what's going on. But as far as the police blotter goes, it's kind of just up to the people whose names appear in that to pursue the paperwork if the charge is dismissed, and then at least that gives them something, because some people might lose their jobs or have their jobs in jeopardy. They can show their employer, look, these charges were dismissed. I don't know why the court document isn't enough, but
Right.
But some people want that out in the open, and that's totally reasonable.
Absolutely. One thing that we didn't talk about in the pre-interview that I just kind of struck me as something that we should mention a couple moments ago is the language that we use when we write arrest stories. And one of the things that you had mentioned previously in this interview was, the fact that, people are innocent until proven guilty. But there's this stigma with being arrested. When somebody's arrested, there's this idea that, oh, well, they must have done it. You know, you get arrested for DUI, I don't know what the percentage is on those turning into convictions, but I imagine it's probably pretty high. So there's this idea that, when you're arrested, you're guilty. And so what type of, writing language should we be using to ensure that we're being very clear that an arrest is an arrest, it's not a conviction?
And that is problematic, and to a certain extent you can write allegedly as every other word in your story and people are still gonna convict somebody in the public. It happens all the time, and there's just no way to get around that.
Yeah.
I think some people would be happy if you only wrote stories when people were being sentenced for something, because that's the end, and what happened at that point. But it's just not feasible. I don't. It would feel wrong to me to have know that a serious court case is going on and not telling the public about it.
Right. One thing that I think
the wording. The wording.
Yeah.
So I learned a long time ago, when writing like cops and court stories, when someone is arrested, they're arrested on suspicion of blank. And a lot of people don't write that, and part of the problem is because, like, when we get news releases from the police department or highway patrol or the sheriff's department, basically any law enforcement agency, they'll say arrested on charges of. Or the highway patrol will say arrested and charged with. Right. They don't know if the person was charged because that's not up to them. The DA says to me, police officers don't charge people. Prosecutors do. And so you have to be really careful with just running with the wording that the police department gives you. So it's always arrested on suspicion of, and then charged with, or accused of, allegedly did this, or if I want to be a little more direct, I'll say charging documents say, and then you can say so-and-so, drove at BAC level of this, or just as long as you, the journalist, are not convicting somebody of crimes. That's always a big no-no.
That is. Which is why we hate the construction arrested for.
Right.
Arrested for DUI, arrested for bank robbery. It's, that you might as well say arrested and convicted.
Exactly.
Because that's what you're basically saying with arrested for. But the construction that you mentioned, arrested on suspicion of, or charging documents say, or arrested and charged with, those are all okay. As long as you're accurate with them, obviously.
Right.
And like you said, make sure that the charges are actually the charges that are coming from the prosecutor, not from the police, because, that's a really great statement that your prosecutor said there. Yes, prosecutors bring charges, police make arrests.
Yes. Yeah, and police even have a lower standard. I believe it's reasonable suspicion, or it's probable cause, and then as you go through the court process, the burden of proof gets greater. But so that's why they call what we're thankful. Talking about public documents, we're thankful, or it's great in Wyoming that we have access to what's called probable cause affidavits that are filed by usually a detective or somebody with the agency. So the way the process works is, if they're investigating a case, then they'll type up this summary. And that's what's called the probable cause affidavit, and then that gets forwarded to the DA's office. A prosecutor looks at it and decides if it supports the charges or not. Sometimes they'll go back to the detective and say, this isn't enough, I need you to look into this more, I need a little more information. So there sometimes is that back and forth. And then when they file the charges, the probable cause affidavit is public along with the charging documents. That's not the case in every jurisdiction, everywhere. I think we're just kind of lucky here. And so that essentially summarizes or outlines the alleged crime, or at least the investigation. It'll say, like, an interview conducted this day, and the person said this, and it kind of outlines that. So, the police don't charge people. They just say, we think this person committed a crime. it's up to you, lawyer person, to decide if you too think this person committed a crime and you want to pursue it in court.
Right. So let's talk about the case study that I gave the students. The case study of the 13-month-old boy who was whose body is still not found. The boy's name is help me with the pronunciation of the last name here.
It's Silas Ojeda.
Ojeda, which I wanted to say Ojeda until you corrected me yesterday.
Everybody wants to say Ojeda, I think, except the family.
And it's their name, and they
Yep.
can be known as they want to be known. So yes, Silas Ojeda. So one of the reading assignments was a collection of some of Sarah's stories of this particular case. So Sarah, if you would kind of walk us through how you found out about the case and the various players involved, how you've reported the case. Can you kind of give us the background, the story behind the story?
Sure. That was a case that we did find out about in a press release from the sheriff's department. The thing with finding out about stuff that way, if we don't hear things on the scanner, is sometimes it can come as a complete shock. I mean, I was in court when we got the press release, and I came back, and people are like, oh, guess what happened? And it just kind of rocks your world for a minute. You're like, they're investigating what? Yeah. So those come out of nowhere, and you have to switch around your day and figure out how you're going to cover this. And then that wound up being something that I covered for like a good week and a half straight. But so that we found out initially in a press release, and then the sheriff's department was pretty good about trying to give us updates as they were coming in. And we just kind of went with it from there. He had court dates that were rescheduled and whatnot. There was one thing I had to pursue because he had a court appearance. He wasn't there, but his attorneys spoke with the judge on the record, and I wanted to know what was talked about. Or I knew what was talked about, but I needed to hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak. And I didn't know. I'd never asked for anything like that from the circuit court before. And I know in the district court, they have a court transcriber there typing everything up, so there's a record. In circuit court, they just record everything with audio, so they don't have anything typed up like that, like you would normally see like a court transcript. So I just asked, I know there was talk on the record. How can I get that record? Do you keep recordings? And they're just like, oh yeah, we have a recording. We can either burn you a disc and charge you $5, or you can bring in your own disc and it'll be free. And so I went ahead and did that, but it was all because I asked. I didn't know what would be available to me, how much it would cost, if anything. I didn't know, but I just had to say, hey, I know I'm looking for this one thing. How do I get this one thing?
Right.
So I got a good story out of that. I was the only person who was able to report on that, and that was essentially they talked about the plea deal in circuit court before the case even moved to district court. So I knew ahead of time that he was going to go in at his arraignment and plead guilty, which is extremely rare. Not so rare in smaller cases. It does happen occasionally, but in big cases like that, it was extremely rare. But he wanted to take that opportunity and avoid the chance that along the road they would find evidence that would show that he's guilty of some greater crime like murder or something like that. And in Wyoming, there's no statute of limitations, so there was no rush to go forward, but he took a plea deal, and that's the end of that.
Yeah. And I guess the only thing left to really solve on that case is finding the boy's body, right?
Well, finding the boy's body and whatever happens with the mom pursuing charges against her, investigating evidence or whatnot. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. And that can be something that's extremely frustrating to the public, and I expressed to at least one member of the public that we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. We can be, cop, judge, and jury as the public, and it's easy for us, because we watch the cop shows on TV that show you everything that's going on behind the scenes from start to finish. But I mean, to a certain extent, it can be frustrating when we feel like we're not getting enough information, but then you have to take a step back and think, well, they do need to do their jobs. Yeah. They do need to be detectives, and they can't tell us everything. It's not like they can open up their case file for us every day and tell us, so these are the developments we've had in this case. So it just kind of, it's about a balance.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I'd like to wrap up on, you talked a lot about interviewing and the importance of asking questions. And how we ask questions and the medium in which we ask questions can be very important in terms of getting, responses and being able to bring stories in on deadline, which has probably been one of the biggest frustrations, I think, for the class. Is, we've had some people who have, just gotten the runaround from various sources on other stories we've covered, make multiple attempts to contact somebody and nobody calls back, or email people and never hear back from them. What interview tips would you have for, beginning public affairs reporters who are about to go out and try to cover their first crime story, especially when it comes to asking questions?
Mm-hmm. Always try to get somebody on the phone. If I don't reach somebody on the phone and it's not somebody that I have a close relationship with, sometimes I might leave them a voicemail and say, oh, hey, I'm also going to shoot you an email in case that's a better way to reach you. And then in the email I say, I also left you a message, but I wanted to shoot you an email in case that was a better way to reach you. But it's very important to always get somebody on the phone. Email is great when you have an established relationship with somebody. You might get a response from them in 5 minutes. I have sources who I can email back and forth, and it's a great way to get information quickly, and you don't have to pick up the phone. But when you don't have an established relationship with a source and you're reaching out to them for the first time, they don't know you from Adam. And, all of our email inboxes are always bombarded all day long with emails. And if they see an email come in from somebody they don't know, first of all, that's going to put it down on the priority list. On the off chance that they look at it, if the email says, oh, hey, give me a call at this number, that's an extra step that they have to take for you. Mm-hmm. They read your email, see the phone number, then they have to reach over and pick up the phone, dial the number, and call you. And then at that point, the onus is on them, and they're cold calling you.
Right.
You've never talked with them. They've never talked with you. They don't know who you are, and then now they're the ones reaching out to you. They're not going to do that.
No, they are not.
So you can't blame them. I mean, everybody has more important things to do, but you have to make yourself seem important to them, and I think the only way to do that is by talking in person, because when you tell them your story and tell them what you're doing, they can empathize with you. They're not going to empathize with an email. So it creates a dialogue and it creates an exchange, and you're going to be so much more likely to get what you're looking for. Or maybe you don't know what you're looking for, and you can talk with somebody and try to be like, oh, hey, I need help with this. Or it creates a conversation, and voicemails are fine too, but I always like to, like I said, follow up voicemails with emails, just because some people are super busy and they do prefer to talk with you via email, but you have to establish that relationship first, I think.
Okay. Sarah, thank you so much for talking with me today. And if you guys want to check out more of Sarah's work at the Wyoming Tribune-Eagle, you can you get 10 free articles a month if you're not a subscriber. Just go to wyomingnews.com.
Expiring soon.
Expiring soon?
I hear.
Oh,
yes.
Really? Oh, you're going behind the full paywall.
I guess so.
Okay. That's, I'm okay with that. It's journalists got to eat, and that's how we get. People have to pay for the dues.
Definitely.
So, annual subscriptions are not that much. You should definitely think about getting one. It's a great news source, and I'm not just saying that because I'm a WTE alum, but okay, partly because I'm a WTE alum. I'm saying that, but it's a great news organization. And how can people find you on Twitter?
I think I'm just at Sarah Zoellick.
Okay.
Just my full name.
All right. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you again, Sarah. Really appreciate it.
Sure. No problem.